At yung kung ano man yung feedback sa hindi pagsipot o pagtanggi na ma-interview ang dating senador, no, na si Bongbong Marcos.
Presidential aspirant Isko Moreno's campaign manager is questioning the COMELEC guidelines on new normal campaigning. Banayo also called out the COMELEC over the tedious process of securing permits for motorcades.
Be real, COMELEC. Be real, DILG. Pag-isip-isip nga kayo, get your feet on the ground. No? Hindi ganun kadali yung mga kung ano-ano sinasabi ninyo. No? Para bang gusto nyo, wag na mag-eleksyon.
Election campaigns are heating up as candidates for national positions are mounting their sorties and presidential aspirants are continuing their visits to provinces. What are the people's expectations from their candidates? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. I'm Robbie Alampay. Also with us online, Ami Pamituan of the Philippine Star, Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5, and here in Mandaluyong with us, Ed Lingao of One News. Chiefs, good evening.
Good evening.
Happy Tuesday.
I know we're starting off rather late, so I suggest we just go straight to our guest. We begin tonight with Mr. Lito Banayo, campaign strategist for presidential candidate Mayor Isko Moreno. Good evening and welcome back, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Ami. Good evening, Lucy.
Good evening, sir.
And good evening, Ed.
And we know there's a presidential forum going on as we speak, but I want to start with the surveys of Pulse Asia. Your take in the Isko camp on the numbers that showed up there.
Before I answer that, with your permission, Roby, I'd just like to clarify things because SMNI was saying last night and the whole day that the candidates who are not appearing in the SMNI debate umatras daw, no? Umatras daw. I'd just like to clarify that hindi namin tinanggap at all, no? Hindi kami umatras, hindi namin tinanggap because when we received it at I think past 5 already, the letter past 5 at February 4, and I learned about it February 5, I looked at our schedule and we were really scheduled to go to Samar 14-15, no? Kasi na-postpone na yung Samar namin because at the time that we were supposed to go there in December, magkakaroon ng bagyo. So we had to cancel it, no? So nakakahiya naman doon sa mga hosts namin. So we had to prioritize Samar and I could not cancel it the second time, no? So that's the reason why we're not there, no? Tapos yung pala lahat din naman most of the candidates refused to attend or had one reason or the other not to attend.
Pero,
So
sir,
let's go to your surveys.
yes, sir. Pero, sir, if not for the conflict in schedule, would Mayor Isko have attended?
Well, I would not have advised for it. I would have advised against it also. No.
Why, sir?
Bakit po?
Because noong February 4, hindi pa naman nag-endorse si Kibuloy, no, when we received it. But I think a few days later, in-endorse na niya si Bongbong at si Sara, pati si Jinggoy Estrada at si Harry Roque. May picture pa sila lahat doon sa airport yata ng Davao yun. So what's the point? What's the point going there? No, they wouldn't be fair. No, I mean, and
Yes, sir.
so.
But sir, if you don't mind, let me play the devil's advocate here. Just the devil's advocate. What would make that any different from Bongbong Marcos refusing to appear before Jessica Soho on the allegation that she is already biased?
Well, that was their allegation. But pwede mo bang i-prove na si Jessica Soho biased? In the first place, I don't think a lot of people know this. The mother of Jessica Soho is the youngest sister of Jose Aspiras, who was Minister of Tourism and Press Secretary of Ferdinand Marcos I. No? Aspiras ang nanay ni Jessica. Paano niya sasabihin biased yun?
O sige, kumusta na lang yung campaigning niyo, Mr. Banayo? Kasi nagagalit na yung Department of Health, pati yung COMELEC, pati yung DILG. Masyado daw nababiolate na yung mga lahat na ng health protocols. Nakikita namin, pati masking, nakakalimutan na kuminsan.
Alam mo
So,
kasi,
ano yung strategy ngayon?
I think yun nga sinasabi ko in earlier interviews, no. I think kay Jovi yata sinabi ko yun at kay Maricel na pwede ba let them go to the ground and see how it is, no? I mean, for instance, yung permits, no. Nagtuturuan ngayon yung local government at COMELEC. Sabi ng COMELEC ang mauuna local government for the permits. And then miski yung dadaanan mo lamang ng bayan, miski na hindi ka naman magsasalita doon, kailangan mo pa rin ihingi ng permit sa local government. Pagpunta mo naman sa COMELEC na regional, sasabihin pala ng local government, kumuha muna kayo sa COMELEC. I mean, these are kasi hastily done regulations na mukhang hindi pinag-isipang mabuti, no? So, talaga magkakaproblema yan. I mean, have you seen any candidate, whether it's Marcos II or Lenny or Pacquiao or kami, 'di ba? Talagang ganyan magkakagulo talaga ang tao. Wala tayong magagawa about that, no? And fortunately enough, we in the areas that we're going to, we're already on alert level 2, no?
Okay.
But on the other hand, we've been in the pandemic for 2 years na. Nagkaroon tayo ng Omicron surge. Alam naman natin yung mga protocols. Wala ba mga marshal dyan na pwedeng magkaroon ng kahit some semblance of crowd control?
Meron namang crowd control, pero yun na nga, wala I mean, at least in our case, no, nakikita namin, dinudumog talaga ng tao tinitigil pa yung sasakyan namin para lamang makita si Isko or para lang makakamay kay Isko. So it's really very difficult, no?
Okay, on that note, Mr. Banayo, balikan ko lang yung first question ko. Your take on the Pulse Asia survey?
Okay, the Pulse Asia survey was done from 19 to 24 January, no? It's as if we're talking about a 3 or 4 week, almost 4 weeks nang delayed yung from the field research to the announcement, no? Okay, so a lot of things have happened from January 22, I think that's the Jessica Soho survey. A few days after, I think January 26 or 27, that thereabouts, nagkaroon ng Boy Abunda. Then there was a DZBB survey, a
Forum, you
DZRH
mean?
survey, or yung
Forum.
survey, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Forum. And then we had the KBP Forum, no, which was also aired live in most channels as well as in SOCMED. So maraming nangyari through that period. Next, February 8, you had the proclamation, no, of all the candidates or most of the presidential candidates. No? So, hindi pa na-capture yung all of those events, especially yung non-appearance ni Ferdinand Marcos II, no, dun sa mga most of those fora, except for, I think, DZRH and Boy Abunda. So maraming events na nangyayari. In a 90-day campaign, yung mga events na yan impact greatly on the surveys, no? So I'm not worried about that, no, because that's an outdated survey. I mean, at the time of the release, it's already outdated. No?
Are you concerned at all that by the time the next survey rolls around, factored in na rin the fact that ito may in-attendance siyang survey? Say what forum, say what you will about SMNI, but the optics here is that people are going to be seeing him on stage and none of the other top contenders on stage with him.
Well, meron ba nanonood sa SMNI to begin with? I mean, media persons kayo, no? You di ba? I mean, to begin with, no? How many subscribe to SMNI?
Yeah.
Di ba? Hindi naman siya major out. I mean, I'm sorry, I have to say this, no? Magalit na yung magagalit sa akin doon sa SMNI. But that is the reality, no? We cannot postpone our long scheduled our previously scheduled appearances in the provinces na napakahirap pang kumuha ng permit dyan sa COMELEC para lamang lumipad ulit, i-cancel mo, babalik ka na naman sa COMELEC or sa local government for another permit just for SMNI na hindi naman pupuntahan ni Lenny Robredo, hindi naman pupuntahan ni Ping Lacson, ni Pacquiao at kami, no?
Okay.
Di ba?
Okay, so let me ask you, what precise details perhaps or points would you say were not captured in the survey? of Pulse Asia that you feel, may count heavily in the next surveys
Well, one, the
from your
interview.
candidate, at least?
The interviews,
Yeah.
the media sponsored forums, no, during the period from January 24 or rather
Yes.
thereabouts, no, to the
Yeah.
present, no, the proclamation rallies, no, and the motorcades
Na-
where you see naman very organic yung crowd, talaga nagkakagulo kay Isko, no, na hindi naman kami naghahakot.
Yes, yes.
Like a candidate who had to bus
No.
in people from Pampanga to bring to Bulacan, no? So wala kaming ganon.
No, I mean, what I meant to ask was, if that were factored in, what do you expect the outcome would be? I mean, because we all know how the forums ran, right?
there
And
is
how
ano.
the campaigns kicked
Yeah.
off. So,
Yeah, Lucy, there is in the Manila Bulletin today a survey which shows that Ferdinand Marcos II has gone down to 52%, 51 point something percent. Round off na natin sa 52. And Isko got 23 point something percent and Lenny got, I think, almost 15%. No? That's the Manila Bulletin Tanhere survey. But our own internal surveys give us a lower figure. No, instead of 23 point something, we were getting 21. But we were already ahead of
but
Lenny.
okay,
Lenny, I
but
think,
you
was,
think
15
that's
or 16 sa internal survey namin.
okay. So you think that's a function of the forum and the campaign kickoff and all
Okay.
these other
Yeah.
things that
Remember-
you're saying? Yeah.
Remember, Lucy, nung kay Duterte, no? We started in January at 20, no? Then we went up to 24 in February. Pagkatapos nag-debate sa Cagayan de Oro, no? And 24 became 28. Why was that? One single thing that Duterte did. All the brashness, pati yung pagmumura sa Pope, nabura yon because Duterte was very gentlemanly to Miriam Defensor Santiago, the late
Okay.
Miriam Defensor Santiago. We told him, huwag mong lalabanan si Miriam Defensor Santiago. Be very deferential to her. He didn't even bother to ask a question of Miriam because he said she was the most intelligent person among all of them. That gave us 4 points because of Cagayan de Oro. But the kicker really was yung kayo sa Cebu. You remember? Channel 5 kayo sa Cebu. No? When, Vice President Binay delayed it for an hour or an hour and a half, no? Because of questions about the format and Pagkatapos, Duterte gave a very brilliant right repost to Senator Grace Poe. Yung 24 namin, sumipa na yon to 29 or something. And tuloy-tuloy na yon. Tuloy-tuloy na yon. Eventually ended up with 39 points. 39% come election day.
Okay,
So,
Mr.
importante yung mga ganyan kasi nakikita yung karakter mo, nagkakaroon ng sila sa personalidad mo, sa karakter mo, at sa galing mo. Talino mo, sa husay mo sumagot, sa mga sinasabi mo.
Okay, Mr. Banayo, we just need to take a break. Steady lang po tayo. Marami po kaming tanong. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back.
Welcome back to Chiefs on One News. We continue our conversation with Lito Banayo, the campaign manager of Manila Mayor Isko Moreno for the presidency. Sir, thank you for staying with us. Sir, and we understand your point na outdated nga yung Pulse Asia survey na nilabas. Pero the fact still remains na really significant yung margin ni Bongbong Marcos over not just Isko but all the other candidates. My question to you is basic, and I think it's everybody's question. What's your grand plan? How do you make up for all those percentage points in the next 2.5 months?
Well, Ed, it's going to be very difficult, definitely. No, I mean, the numbers. This is the first time that a front runner in the presidential derby is polling that
Yes, sir.
high this
Yes,
early.
sir.
No, so medyo mahirap, no. But determinado naman kami, and we think we have a much better candidate than the competition. So kita mo naman sa motorcades, sobra dami ng tao in our events, which are almost, wala kaming hinahakot, wala kaming no, and talagang very warm, very enthusiastic ang tao, no. So I think this is going to tell, and of course the other point here, which I find a bit disturbing, is maraming nagko-cross ng party lines, no, in the sense na sa bagay, nangyayari din ito dati. Natandaan mo yung Noibi.
Yeah.
Imbis na Noymar,
Yep.
merong nag-Noibi, di ba? Nakalusot si Vice President Jojo Binay, no? Maraming ganyan, no? So ngayon, for instance, among the Muslim Mindanaoans, no? Napakadami ang nag-iisko Sara. Hindi namin kinakausap, hindi namin ine-encourage because we have a vice president which is Doc Willie Ong, and we do not intend to trade him for anything. But hindi mo naman mapapipigilan yung mga, halimbawa, yung mga ayaw kay Ferdinand Marcos II, no? At naghahanap ng ibang kandidato. Then there is the other option here, the other phenomenon here is yung PDP laban, which is ostensibly the biggest political party because of Rodrigo Duterte, the president. Marami nag-shift ngayon kay Isko, no? Nakita niyo, for instance, dating secretary ng Agrarian Reform ni Presidente Duterte, si John Castricciones, went to our proclamation rally, and with just about 24 hours notice.
Yeah, he's also the founder of the Partido Federal.
Yes. I didn't know that until I talked to him nung gabi, nung proclamation night, no? There will be a major movement also of PDP Laban, MRRD stalwarts in the coming weeks, no, to Isko. So yung mga ganon, those things can happen pa in the next few weeks and months.
Mr. Banayo, in the next 2 months, I want to ask about how your candidate is positioning again, and specifically what he has been saying again, particularly that away to ng dalawang pamilya or dalawang kampo, the Reds as he call it, and on the other hand, they call it the Yellows / the Pinks. But by his reckoning and his statement, he said, let's look at it this way. The Reds, the Marcoses, 21 years, and then he said the Yellows and the Pinks, 18 years. Saan galing yung 18 years? You had two terms under the Cory Aquino and then Noynoy Aquino, and it seems as if he's attributing the last 6 years to Leni Robredo. Is that what he's saying?
Well, ang inaano niya, dinagdag niya yung 6 years ni Leni Robredo because Leni Robredo was given a position in Duterte's government.
Oh, come on. But I have to, but let's be quick about this, only because we don't, but let's be, everybody knows that she had very limited function in the cabinet. Those two positions that you're mentioning were very, very short-lived. So are you saying that Isko Moreno is blaming the last 6 years of the Duterte administrations to Leni Robredo's very limited role?
Hindi sa ganon. Kundi instead of cooperating with the president at the time, I mean up to now, the president, she decided to become oppositionist all of a sudden. No? I know there is something wrong with the arithmetic na hindi naman ano, pero ibig sabihin, yun ang tinutumbok niya, no? Na sana nakipag-cooperate instead of nag-oppose early on during the regime or during the reign of President Duterte.
Mr. Banaya, pahabol ko lang, are you actively courting support from other parties? Kasi sabi niyo dumadami from PDP, Laban, and other groups.
Actually, we're not actively courting support. No, what is happening is they are coming to us, principally because they do not like Ferdinand Marcos II, which is understandable. No, marami naman nag-suffer nung panahon ni President Marcos the First, no. So, marami syempre hindi pa nakakalimot ng mga ganon, ano, na mga memories of the past, no.
And Mayor Isko will continue to welcome any endorsement from President Duterte.
Of course. But the President has already said he's going to stay neutral. Hindi naman namin kinakausap si Presidente Duterte, no? May mga nakakausap kaming cabinet members. Siyempre, hindi ko naman maitatanggi yun kasi mga kaibigan ko naman sila. And I know for a fact that many of the existing, the ones remaining in the cabinet, also are not in favor of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., no? Although meron din naman na I think 4 or 5 cabinet members, mostly from the north, who are rooting for Marcos II.
Okay.
You know, we guested Dean Tony Lavinia yesterday here.
I see.
And he was saying that none of the candidates, including Bongbong Marcos, none of the candidates is wooing the youth vote and are also not campaigning on the barangay level with the exception of BBM. Can you give us your take on that? You agree?
Well, ang problema kasi dyan, we have to give it to Ferdinand Marcos Jr., no? The fact na matagal siyang naghanda. I mean, while everybody was still busy with other things, no? Isko with being mayor of Manila, everything else, he had a huge lead time. All the while that we were thinking na he was just working on his protest kay Vice President Lenny, yung pala nagbi-build up na sila, no? So that's one thing, no. Kaya yung barangay level hindi ganun kadali. If you're a latecomer in the race, no, hindi ganun kadali. Totohanan, no. So, but then the barangay level support has been built on false myths, no. You've heard of the Italiano Gold, you've heard of the maraming mga kung ano-ano, may Nostradamus pa kung ano-ano, no. Targeted at the lowest levels, the lower D and E, no, na naniniwala siguro doon sa mga mga myths na fina-fabricate. No? But that notwithstanding, that's par for the course, no. At this point in time, kaya sinabi ko earlier, hindi madali ang laban na ito, no. So we really have to appeal to the people directly and through their local government units. Now, fortunately naman, marami naman local government officials na nagsuswitch to us.
Okay, Lito Banayo, Campaign Manager of Manila Mayor Isko Moreno. Sir, maraming salamat for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on board.
Sir, maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
Ingat po.
Ami,
Salamat, sir.
Robbie, Ed, thank you very much.
And now joining us is Local Government Development Foundation Executive Director, Professor Edmund Tayo. Hi, sir, and good evening. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back to the Chiefs.
Hi, Prof.
Hi,
Prof.
good evening. Thanks for having me again.
Yes, sir. Well, siyempre, sir, malaking usapin pa rin yung Pulse Asia survey. Marcos with a widening margin. What do you think accounts for this increasing margin?
Well, matagal na natin pinag-usapan yan. Wala namang nababago din kasi sa estilo o sa pangangampanya ng mga kalaban. At, well, kasama na din yan yung mga nabanggit doon sa usapan ninyo kanina, whether or not there's some truth to early preparations. But I'm inclined to think kahit yung mga late announcements ng mga kandidato, kasama pa din yung pag-factor in ng preparations na maaga. as we've discussed in previous programs, you have to look at the overall equation. The campaign is just a part of the whole scenario. The campaign is but a tool or an instrument. You've seen no less than Lito Banayo, who has of course recognized in terms of his experience in the campaign. But despite the laurels, no, in the names of most of those running the campaigns of the other candidates, it somehow tries to ask or beg the question, no? What is it exactly? What's the key ingredient, no, that keeps the campaign of the former senator going and even increasing? And yun yung sinasabi ko, unang-una, the whole narrative really is the one that they should look at, no? Kasi whether we like it or not, pag tinignan mo yung nagra-rank ngayon sa surveys, malaki pa din yung Duterte factor. I'm not saying the Duterte factor in terms of the president endorsing anyone, but in terms of similarities, no, to the candidate Duterte before, it seems that the voters see this, no, in the former senator, and so many of the different so many of the other candidates as far as being senator is concerned. So yun yung unang-una. Pangalawa, masyadong divisive yung campaign ng iba, no? Kapag hindi nila kakampi, either TANGA or hindi nag-iisip o hindi makabayan, no? At meron pang mga nagsasabi na hindi ko iboboto yan dahil magnanakaw. Ilang beses na natin pinag-uusapan, ano? Kahit pa sabihin na natin na ang quintessential na magnanakaw yung kandidatong ayaw nila, maaari ba nating sabihin na merong isang man lang doon sa mga tumatakbong kandidato yung talagang malinis na masasabi natin given the kind of political setup that we have? Yun na nga yung sinasabi ko, hindi ko na nga tinatawag na political system Yung klase ng pamumulitika, klase ng politika, klase ng paggogobyerno natin, mahirap kasing magsabi na, ito malinis, o kung hindi man malinis, maraming nagawa. So yun yung medyo nakakalungkot dito, no? Masyadong naging polarized yung politika natin at wala na tayong pinag-uusapan ng mga konkretong mga issue kung hindi puro personalidad na lang.
I'm not sure that's accurate, frankly. No,
But of course, everyone's free to his own opinion.
Maraming nag-observe na compared to past elections, wala masyadong batuhan ng akusasyon ang mga kandidato one against the other, no? I can't recall any candidate among the presidential candidates at least na nagsasabi na yan si magnanakaw yan mga corrupt yan. Kung meron man silang tinitira. Yeah.
No. Yeah. I referred to the social media. Yung mga followers.
Okay, yeah.
Kaya sabi ko, polarize ang politika natin.
Right. But I don't think that it's a strategy that any of the candidates are actually taking up. Diba? And using,
whether or not it's a conscious strategy, Lucci, or not, it has become uniform or it's common sa mga followers kasi nila Yun yung pinag-uusapan natin dito.
Definitely among the followers.
I think maybe a good example or a nice example would be yung batuhan does it only come from one side? Kasi lahat sila, I mean, all the supporters of the candidates nagbabatuhan. I'll just give an example. I think a lot of people complain na the yellows or the pinks, they look down on the other candidates and their supporters. But at the same time, for the last 6 years, the yellows have been complaining that Robredo has been derided as stupid or bobo and lutang. So pare-pareho silang nagbabatuhan.
Kaya nga sabi ko, Ed, masyadong naging polarized yung politika. What I'm saying is, if you're the candidate, okay, can you not at least convince your followers to, at the very least, no, tone down the rhetoric? And I'm inclined to agree, of course, na pareho yan. But I have to ask also, if we all agree that it has become polarized, saan at kailan nag-umpisa yon? Kasi again, marami nagsasabi hindi nag-iisip yung mga botante, pero yun na nga, if you look at voting behavior, no, yung pattern ng pagboto ng mga botante, hindi natin maikakaila na merong experimentation na nangyayari, no? So merong instance na merong theme na sinusunod. I already explained this. After the end of the dictatorship, ang binoboto yung mga nagkaroon ng pangalan sa EDSA Revolution. Pagkatapos nun, nakita nila wala man nangyayari, mga professionals itong mga nakilala EDSA Revolution, nagboto ng mga artista. And if you remember, that's 1995-1998 elections, basta artista ka, nanalo ka. And then after that, hindi porke artista ka, mananalo ka. If you remember, Cesar Montano came into the game rather later than 1998. Hindi na siya nanalo, and so many of the local candidates na mga artista na nanalo nung una, hindi na nanalo. And then ang mga nanalo na yung mga naging kilala dahil sa mga kudita, mga naging general, and so on, and eventually mga businessmen.
Professor,
no? So, yeah.
May iba ko ng konti ay yung mensahe ng unity, and even this whole point about you have to learn how to reach out to the other side. Parang ay lumalabas na narrative doon is that our society is so divided that unity and yung pagkasawa sa mga bangayan is so overpowering now that it even overpowers issues of corruption. And therefore, nabanggit nyo kanina, there are limits to the conversation about Marcos magnanakaw. There are limits to that na parang factored in. But I therefore want to ask, and I guess it's a basic question I haven't actually asked. Do the numbers bear out that Filipinos are in fact aware na magnanakaw yung mga magulang niya? Are Filipinos, is that a given for the Filipino voters? Are they aware na magnanakaw ang si Ferdinand at Imelda Marcos, that they've been convicted? Are they aware na bilyon-bilyon na ang nabawi sa mga ninakaw nila? Are they aware that Bongbong Marcos is a tax evader? Or are you saying that, kasi it's either two things, either we're doing a poor job of communicating history or factored in yung history, pero that's not really the thing that matters to them now.
Well, Roby, I would have to agree. I would have to admit that I wouldn't really know exactly how exactly the general public now thinks. But I can agree as far as education is concerned. No, pagdating pa nga lang sa mga textbooks, in the past few years nagkaroon pa ng mga issues ng mali-mali sa mga textbooks. So kahit na yung mga hindi inabutan yung martial law, talagang pwede nating sabihin na hindi nila natatandaan. Now, whether or not they're aware that the Marcoses have this history and that they've been convicted in several cases and so on and so forth. Now, I don't think hindi naman nakita ng mga ng publiko yan. But again, the question is, bakit despite all this information, no, and lalo na ngayon, no, nangunguna ang dating Senador Bongbong Marcos, tuloy-tuloy pa din yung pag-inform sa mga tao na, nung 1995 na nagkaroon ng ganitong kaso at natalo at napatunayan na hindi nagbayad ng buwis and so on and so forth. But again, the question is, why is it that it is not resonating? That's why I'm saying it's not just the campaign, it's not just the information dissemination, it's the overall, it's the overall context, basically. It's the overall equation. Kaya nga sinasabi ko, kung tama at mag-agree tayo na meron Duterte factor, pwede nating isurmise, and I hope that there can be a study in this regard, that perhaps what the public is looking for is someone who can be compared to Duterte, or that someone who's definitely not tied to or equated to or identified with the administration previous to Duterte. Yun lang ang pwede kong masabi dito kasi hindi naman ako gumawa pa ng FGD. I haven't really gone down to the grassroots and the community level and ask a good number of people why is it that they are rooting for the former senator.
Okay.
Well, in fact, meron ngang isang observation na masyadong mild yung banat kay Bongbong Marcos considering all the baggage he has. And he is actually benefiting from it. That's another perception dito sa campaign na to. You think that's true also? Or there's
Well, hindi naman nawawala yung mga banat na yan, no? Siguro kung ganyan ang nakikita nilang anggulo, siguro pag-ibayuhin pa yung pag-inform sa mga tao na ganito talaga nangyari. But what is really lacking, and not one of the candidates, not even former Senator Bongbong Marcos, no? I've heard the inaugural the proclamation speeches of many of our presidential candidates. Alam mo, ang nakakalungkot dito, walang konkretong sinasabi. Kahit pa sabihin natin na unity, pagsasama-samahin, actually paulit-ulit. No? And I have yet to hear a concrete proposal how to exactly, go about this so-called unification. And ganun din sa ibang mga kandidato. Wala pa akong nadidinig na konkretong proposal pagdating sa mga issue. Meron tayong mas maraming poder na idadagdag sa mga lokal na pamahalaan. At nangyayari na ngayon na 2022, malaking impact ito sa budgeting system natin, pero walang nagsasalita. What I'm trying to say is, if the other candidates are looking for a different formula, they might want to consider coming up with a more concrete proposals, so to speak. Ni isang kandidato nga wala pang nagsasabi na, in 6 months, re-resolbahin ko yung droga. Kahit pa sabihin natin na masyadong na walang gustong mag-risk ng ganung mga pangako, at the end of the day, it can work because the people would like to probably hear someone saying na, ito yung konkreto kong gagawin, 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Wala pang ganun. So,
Okay. Professor Edmond Tayaw, maraming salamat po. Unfortunately, and we have one more guest. Maraming salamat po. Professor Edmond Tayaw is Executive Director of the Local Government Development Foundation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Now joining us is Attorney Ruben Carranza, Senior Expert for Programs at the International Center for Transitional Justice, and we have to say also formerly with the PCGG, really involved in recovering a lot of the Marcos wealth. I want to introduce you that way, Ruben, and remind people, not that a lot of people need reminding, because I think you may have heard, we were having this conversation with Professor Tayaw right now. And it's a sincere question, even for media right now. And I think a lot of people in Philippine society are genuinely perplexed. Saan ba nagkukulang yung narrative na Marcos magnanakaw? I mean, I'd like to think media has done that for so many years. And yet clearly, if you look at the numbers right now, ang taas ng approval, not approval rating, ang taas ng ranking ni Bongbong Marcos sa mga survey. What? Are we just desensitized? Do you think that is already factored into how people are thinking? Or are we deceiving ourselves? Have we actually failed in communicating this?
Sir,
Nakamute ka pa.
Mas madali kasing,
Okay, go ahead.
mas madali kasing magpatakbo ng kasinungalingan kaysa magpaliwanag ng katotohanan na komplikado. And if we start on that premise, it's much easier for Marcos Jr. to fabricate an explanation for how his family amassed $5 to $10 billion over 20 years than for anyone else, including myself, to explain the difficulty, the challenges of not only getting that money back, which is one thing in itself, on one hand, and then on the other, to try to explain to voters that that money was obtained through corruption, because those are two different things. And on one hand, I as a former commissioner at the PCGG, I can explain easily how we made choices during the litigation of these cases and why we adopted certain strategies over others. On the other hand, corruption has been normalized in the Philippines, and the normalization, Marcos Jr. obviously benefits from the normalization of corruption. And therefore, it's much easier to explain from his end that his family is not an exceptionally corrupt family, and that therefore, it takes away the main point of the criticism, the main point of the attacks against Marcos Jr.
Sir, you were directly involved in the recovery of several $1 million in the 2000s. I don't recall if it's 2003 or 2005. But yet, I'm sure you've heard about this, and I've read this, and I've encountered these arguments. There are people who still say that never happened. So, did it really happen, and by how much? And where did it go? That's the other question that's always being raised. Where did the money go? Kung totoong na-recover yan, abay, saan napunta?
That's what I've noticed. No? Meron ako nakikitang very, very deliberate and significant shift, both in terms of the legal argument and just the political argument, because now it's a campaign, it's the campaign period. The shift has been from Marcos Jr. and his propagandists saying that this money, that these cases have not been proven, that Imelda Marcos has never been convicted with a final executory judgment, that there are still there are no ill-gotten wealth assets that have been completely recovered. So there's a denial, wholesale, and then a shift to there are assets, but we obtain them not through ill-gotten means, not through illegal or criminal means, and then they leave the public to speculate on exactly how that is, and that's the door that's been opened. That you have explanations that range from the most absurd to the most hypocritical. That we were powerful and we were ruling for 20 years. Now that's dangerous, first of all, because like I said, that normalizes corruption. But the problem there is that it then completely flips the story, that you've recovered ill-gotten wealth, but you have not proven that it is ill-gotten. And that's why, and I think one of the most effective retorts to that has been Chief Justice Maylou Sereno's retort that if these were not ill-gotten, why did we recover them? And I think that's where Marcos Jr. still has a problem in terms of coming back, in terms of counter-arguing against that. Now, so that's now the shift. No? That this ill-gotten wealth was ill-gotten in some other way, but not through corruption. I think it's not as effective as they think it is, because if you pursue the line a little bit further, it still requires an explanation. How did you become so rich?
Yeah.
How are you able to fund your children?
Pero Mr. Carranza, one of the biggest reasons for the revisionism, the success of the revisionism, kasi walang nakukulong. Yun lagi sinasabi nila eh. You have ill-gotten wealth, merong ninakaw, nasan yung magnanakaw? Bakit hindi nakulong? That's billions and billions of dollars, not even pesos, and so many unimaginable wealth. Bakit walang nakukulong? Yun ang tanong. So ano ba yung status ng effort na may makulong man lang kahit sino?
Right, and this is what I meant by it's more complicated to explain the legal strategy that was followed than it is to lie about where the ill-gotten wealth comes from. Because in the legal strategy that was followed, you had two objectives. One was, of course, to recover the money, and the other is to prosecute the corrupt. The PCGG is in charge of recovering the money, and to the extent that the PCGG has recovered billions, then it was able to recover billions. On the other hand, the Office of the Ombudsman and the Special Prosecutor under the Office of the Ombudsman are in charge of prosecuting the Marcoses. And that's where it becomes more complicated, because the simplest answer really is that the same corruption that allowed the Marcoses to amass ill-gotten wealth is the same corruption that allowed the Marcoses to still have impunity up to today. But you cannot just explain that away. You cannot just say, dahil sa corruption, hindi pa nakukulong ang mga Marcos, because then it goes back and says, then why have you been able to recover, but why have you not been able to prosecute and convict?
Yeah,
So I think the best... Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
And not only that, the extreme counterfactual to that is, kung kulong lang pala ang bibilangin natin dito, wala naman talaga nakukulong sa Pilipinas. People say, malinaw naman na endemic na, at embedded at normalized ang corruption, and yet, wala naman talaga nakukulong dito sa Pilipinas. But if you carry that argument, walang corruption sa Pilipinas.
And I think that's why the role of journalists and journalism here is really important, because I know that journalists also have to adhere to certain standards of factual reporting and make sure there's basis for it. But it's very difficult to do factual reporting on a day-to-day or even a year-to-year basis, as it is. But to go back further and to talk about corruption in the 1970s and how you only had one Solicitor General, one Justice Minister, that's Estelito Mendoza, how powerful he has become. That's the explanation for the corruption behind the absence of any conviction, behind the impunity of the Marcoses. It's Estelito Mendoza and the powerful network in the judiciary that he's been able to establish. Now, for journalists, that's a very difficult piece of reporting to insert into discussing how the Marcoses continue to have impunity. But that's where I have to say this.
Yeah.
That's how it should have been reported versus headlines that say Sandigan Bayan dismisses $200 billion Marcos suit. The $200 billion is the damage claim, and you go further. There's a separate opinion that says this has actually been proven in 2003 already, so there's no need for this case to be filed. But that's complicated, and I think journalists are still catching up to the legal aspect, to simplifying the legal aspects of the litigation in the Marcos cases.
So you're saying ang problema natin is we have the best justice that money can buy,
Yes and no. I mean, look at it this way. The Chief Justice is a PCGG commissioner, was a PCGG commissioner. I worked with him. In fact, he was the one who recovered about what is now about $43 million in Marcos ill-gotten assets that are still in New York, but already ruled previously by a court as belonging to the Philippines. It was the Chief Justice who actually went to Panama, brought these documents that were given to the Philippines by Switzerland in order to present to Panamanian authorities and say, this belongs to the Philippine government. So it's not as if they don't know or he doesn't know what happened.
I mean, to your point about how difficult it is to tell a story when gaslighting is much easier and much more powerful. I also get the sense that when we get lured or compelled to talk about, let's go back to 1970s, let's go back to 1980s, and all of that is told, it's also somewhat misleading people because people are get into this conversation na, pero nun yan tatay at nanay niya yan and I think there's also an importance of having to contextualize Bongbong Marcos and Amy Marcos in that corruption, in that thievery. Because ang convicted naman talaga yung nanay. Di ba? And ang pinatalsik naman talaga yung tatay. So what's the context for Bongbong Marcos that makes it easier for people? Ano bang konteksto? Ano bang role ni Bongbong Marcos pagdating officially doon sa mga nabawi na pera? What is his personality there?
Siya yung may hawak ng susi doon sa kung saan tinatago ang ill-gotten wealth. Kung hindi man siya mismo ang diktador, siya yung may hawak ng susi na iniwan sa kanya ng tatay niya na diktador. Now that argument, of course, requires unpacking because hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na si Bongbong Marcos na ngayon ang susi doon sa nakaw na yaman ni Marcos. And I think this is where professionals in the Philippines can help. Tax professionals, accountants, and even lawyers. And I'm waiting for the professional associations who represent these professions to actually come in and support the argument that based on their professional judgments, that these are all ill-gotten wealth. Now, the Bongbong Marcos, let's just use the Arelma example I gave earlier. That account was opened in New York in 1972 by a Panamanian corporation created via Switzerland. In other words, Marcos directed his Swiss bankers to create a corporation in Panama called Arelma. And then this corporation in Panama called Arelma opened a bank account in Merrill Lynch in New York, 1972. How much was deposited? $2 million. Who were the beneficiaries of this account? One of them was the 15-year-old Marcos Jr. So there, of course, if you stop there, you say, it was 15, how could he have known? But the problem is that the PCGG only recovered Arelma in 1999, before I joined the PCGG. This was when the Chief Justice was Commissioner Hismundo of the PCGG, which means he was 51 years old. So between 15 years old to 51 years old, Marcos Jr. enjoyed the benefits of an account that started at 2 million and is now at 43 million. And that's just one account. In other words, he's the beneficiary of ill-gotten wealth. He has lived on ill-gotten wealth. He has dined on ill-gotten wealth. He has sent his children to London, to everywhere else.
If he's the
other than the public
beneficiary,
schools in the Philippines.
if he's the beneficiary, is that the same to say that if they succeed in fighting this, that he's also ultimately officially a claimant to that money? In the United States, there have already been decisions that say they are no longer claimants because the money belongs to the Philippine government. So that now the litigation in the U.S. is really between the Philippine government and the victims of the Marcos dictatorship, ironically, rather than the Marcos family.
But sir, in 2016, we had a chance to interview Bongbong Marcos, specifically about the Swiss bank accounts. We asked him, why did you lay claim to the Swiss bank accounts? Because he was part of the pleadings. Why did you lay claim to the Swiss accounts when the amounts are way over the legal salaries, the legitimate income of your parents? His response basically was he does not know why his lawyers acted the way they did. And when pressed further, he said that I suppose you try to gain whatever advantage you can in court. What role did he have in laying claim to these accounts from 1986, 87 down to 2003?
After his father died, so this is after his father died, he became the co-administrator of the estate of his father. So him and his mother. But before his father died, but while they were in exile in Hawaii, he was actually the one leading the effort to transfer assets, to try to both access the assets because they were frozen and then have them transferred. That's why you have Operation Big Bird. That's why you have Michael de Guzman. That's why you have all these characters coming in and out of the Philippine, Marcos stage, trying to maneuver. And that role meant he was aware not only of the amount of the assets, not only of the fact that his parents could not have amassed those assets without committing corruption, but he was aware of the effort. He was leading the effort to hide them. That's why in the transcript of the Sandigan Bayan hearings regarding the Swiss bank accounts, he was explicitly asked by then Justice Francis Garcitorena, are these assets in Switzerland all in cash? And very confidently, knowing everything he knows, Marcos Jr. says, no, they're not all in cash. They're in various instruments. He can answer in detail if he wanted to. And his lawyers stopped him from answering in detail. That's why they stepped in and say things like, you don't have to answer that. So, in other words, Marcos Jr. is not only a beneficiary of ill-gotten wealth, he's now leading the effort to hide, and if they can access it, spend ill-gotten wealth.
So he's a claimant. He is a claimant. He's the executor. That's the metaphorical key that you were saying, that any movement to try to defend it, it ultimately leads up to him.
Right. And when I said that in the U.S. courts, they no longer considered a legitimate claimant, that means that their claims have been dismissed there. But in the Philippines, they factually will continue to argue, of course, that this is our money.
Yes.
Mainly to be able to explain why they have money to spend, that this isn't ill-gotten wealth. But the 2003 decision of the Philippine Supreme Court already foreclosed the legal argument that any of this is their money beyond the $304,000 that the Supreme Court said is the only legitimate income of his parents. Now, one very telling thing I saw a couple of days ago was that Marcos Jr. was asked about disclosing his statement of assets and liability, that whether public officials should be compelled to disclose their salary. He says no, only when there's litigation. And then he mentions the example of former Chief Justice Roberto Corona as having been a victim of this process of using statement of assets as a basis for prosecution or also basis for impeachment in that case. He doesn't realize that it was Chief Justice Corona who wrote the decision using the statement of assets and liabilities, the absence of it, by his parents, and in the decision that says, well, without that, we can only say that you only had 304,000. So I think Marcos Jr. needs good lawyers in the same way that he has probably good social media strategists.
That's all well and good. But my question is, if he wins, what happens to all of this?
He was quoted also recently that he will not abolish the PCGG. That he in his knowingly hypocritical way, he said he will strengthen the PCGG. But I think he should catch himself again
after
there because
him.
Exactly, because the PCGG is a body created by law. It's not a body created by a president. It might be called that, a presidential commission, but it was created by law. And the law is very explicit. It makes a factual finding that they amassed ill-gotten wealth, and that they had cronies, and that they themselves were corrupt. So he will have, he says, strengthen the PCGG. The only way to actually strengthen it is for him to come forward and say, well, here's our ill-gotten wealth, we're returning it, and I'm now president, and maybe this is the time for me to do this, but I don't think he will do that.
Okay. Attorney Ruben Carranza, maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Attorney.
Salamat din.
Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
That's all for this edition of the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to everyone, mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ami Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Ed Lingao, and we are One News.